Hello, Professor Mark. This will be the last PowerPoint I will be doing for you. So here we go. Introduction. I made a 2D iOS platformer with an in-game wallet system, and I'm using candy for that in-game wallet. Players are allowed to collect candy in the levels, and then the candy amount ranges from 5 to 15. And then there's also a costume shop where players can buy costume, and these costumes show up in the levels. Project objectives was to transform our design specifications into working code by industry best practices. Another one was to develop our user interfaces for our projects, update the test plans for all the new functionality we made, and also execute them to make sure everything was actually functioning, document all of our code, and validate that our application adhere to our requirements and technical design specifications. So functional overview for my project, character has movements. That means they can run, they can jump, they can attack. There's the costume shop, so players can buy costumes with the in-game wallet, like I said earlier. The costumes appear in the levels. Like I said earlier, when the character would collect them, they would change into those costumes, and enemies appear in costumes for the player to attack. So the user experience for my application, I had buttons. All of my important buttons were labeled. So I had the buttons for the shop, I had the buttons for to play game, setting button had like an icon, so the player knew where to go and they weren't just like clicking buttons to try and figure out what was happening. Movement buttons was the main game scheme. That would be the jump, attack, and move left and right buttons. Those were placed in an area where the character does not go, so that when the user would be moving their character, their own hands wouldn't be in the way of them knowing what was going on. And lastly, most scenes can go to and fro, making it easier for the user to move through. So there's barely any place in the application where the user is just like stuck there. My tech overview / design decisions. So I made this application in Swift, and I chose the gameplay kit and the sprite kit and the Swift UI frameworks to do this application because I remember reading somewhere that Apple said that those frameworks were optimized for mobile gaming on their devices. I didn't use the NS user defaults to save my data. I did this instead of the core data like I had originally proposed because it was easier and it made the application lighter without having to add a database file because it basically did what I wanted to do anyways, which is save it to the phone as long as the user had the application installed. I also applied this application to iPhone 6 and 12 and it was running on iOS 13 and 14. And then I developed the application in Xcode because that is where I saw it was the easiest to use all of Swift's lovely tooling, such as being able to automatically animate a character or putting things on the screen was made really easy in Xcode. The challenges I faced were iOS and game development. So as you know, we don't really do that, and it was like really new to me. And I didn't know exactly how I was going to start. Like I did some tutorials, but I had no clue what I was doing the entirety of my development process. Also, learning Swift, again, that was a new language for me, which honestly, after 4 years in this program, Swift was easier to pick up than I thought it would be. It was more about syntax than anything. We we figured out the logic years ago. Getting a design on paper earlier, and especially in 451, was difficult because it was just not something that was much required of us. So having to sit down and really figure out what I wanted my application to do, what would make it run better, what would make it more user friendly, all of that things, along with having to do like the logic on physical architecture diagrams and UML diagrams, all those like different diagrams that we usually don't do, and I had to sit there while also figuring out what those diagrams are supposed to look like, also apply that to my own application. Also, during development, implementing the store and working with the sprite kit was terrible. um, I had to pass around a lot of things to implement the store, and Sprite Kit sometimes makes that really difficult. And the way that nodes work is like, even if everything was in the family of a regular node, they had the different properties, obviously. So it was like, this node is not equal to this node. So it's like, we won't pass this around, even though I needed it to. So I had to like cast a lot of things as other things. It was a mess. Um, the limitations of my application. So the user has to delete the app from their phone to be able to start a new game. I have not put a new game functionality into the application. Also, the user cannot adjust their sound settings at the moment, so like whatever sounds they hear is just the default sounds. There are also currently only 3 shops in the costume shop, so I want to be able to have more costumes in the shop, as well as actually implement the ability functionality. Bugs and malfunctions. There's not really a lot of bugs in here. It's just some minor issues I had with animation, specifically where I had the character change on the game scene. And then we're gonna do the demo. So you might have seen this video before. I'm just gonna like talk over it. But here it is, the Halloween Hideout game. So right now, as you're seeing, is the main screen, and we are going to go to the settings, and here it is. And then you go back out, and we're back in the main scene. I believe now it's next to store. So you see, I'm gonna pause it. You see all of the costumes that we have available, and then we're gonna pick the third one. I believe that was the free one. And on the upper right hand corner over here, you see that the user currently has 0 money because they haven't really played anything. So you can go over here and buy the costume. So they're gonna buy the costume. It's gonna change to own, and then when you click back, the costume will be bought. So they'll own it, and then obviously it's not going to decrease on the screen because it was a free costume. But then once we go back into the main game, after we do player selection, so here we are, we're doing character selection. So as you can see here, this character over here was clicked, and that's a locked character, so that's why this popped up. And then we're going to click the girl on the left, and we're going to push the play button, and that's going to take us and the character into the main game. So as you can see, and then here over there was, and up here is where the tutorials are for telling the user what to do. Also, there's those buttons I talked about. As you can see, they're not inhibiting the player from seeing what their character is doing. And then as you go over to the left, that orb over here is where the player, or it represents a character. So the player would jump into it and they would change. So as you can see, like she's blinking and stuff now, and it's kind of static here. That was one of the bugs I had. Sometimes it did it, sometimes it did not. So, and then the change back, and then you're gonna go to the right, and once you hit the sign, it's going to tell the user what candy does and what costumes do and why you should collect the candy. And then the player is going to collect the candy and then proceed to, and then the candy will increment in the upper right corner once it's collected, and it will proceed to go and attack an enemy, I believe is next in this video. And jump up there to show that the candy has not been collected, so each candy is its own entity. The enemy has now died, and that is being shown to say you can't do anything else with the enemy because it's in its dead state. And then next we're going to go to the arrow where it's showing basically the game over screen. So when that happens, the game over happens, and you can go to menu or you can go to replay. So we're going to go to menu and then go to store, and you can see that the shop incremented. So now the user has $5 or 5 pieces of candy in their costume shop. And that is the end of my game. It was a pleasure being in your class. And yeah, it's kind of sad. So I'm going to go before I cry. Have a good next school year.